What would you do if you woke up one morning and saw 50 United States Marines surrounding your house, even though the only thing you'd done was give food to a homeless old woman? Not police, not detectives, Marines. Armed military vehicles parked across the street. Neighbors standing frozen on their porches. Curtains moving in every house nearby. Phones recording from every angle. And in the middle of all that chaos stood a 17-year-old black teenager whose hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the edge of his bedroom window. Because less than 24 hours earlier, he had done what he'd been doing for months. He brought dinner to an old homeless woman sitting beside an abandoned bus stop. That's it. No crime, no fight, no argument, just one small act of kindness. But by sunrise, the entire neighborhood looked like a military operation had been launched in the middle of the street. And the scariest part, the Marines weren't there by accident. They were looking for him. Now before we get into this unbelievable story, I want you to stay with me until the very end because the truth about that homeless woman, and the reason trained Marines stood outside this teenager's home in complete silence, will completely change the way you see this story. And trust me, the final message she left behind is something you will never forget. The neighborhood where this happened sat on the edge of the city where broken sidewalks, old apartment buildings, and flickering streetlights had become so normal that people stopped noticing them years ago. Most families there worked long hours just to survive. Everybody minded their own business because survival itself already took enough energy. And in one of those aging apartment buildings lived a teenager named Marcus Reed and his mother Denise. Marcus wasn't the type of kid people talked about. No trouble, no popularity, no drama. At school he stayed quiet. Teachers liked him because he listened more than he spoke. After classes ended every afternoon, he worked part-time at a grocery store stocking shelves until late evening. Then he'd head home, usually exhausted, with sore feet and barely enough money saved to help his mother cover rent. Denise worked overnight shifts at a nursing home across town. She hardly slept. Some mornings Marcus would wake up and find her still sitting in her work uniform at the kitchen table, eyes closed, too tired to even make it to bed. Life wasn't easy for them, but they survived by sticking together. And maybe that's why Marcus noticed things other people ignored. Especially her. The old woman first appeared during winter. Nobody knew where she came from. One week the abandoned bus stop near the old laundromat was empty, and the next week she was there every single day wrapped in worn blankets beside a shopping cart filled with random items nobody could identify. People in the neighborhood avoided her. Some claimed she talked to herself. Others thought she was mentally ill. Teenagers laughed when they passed her. Store owners complained about her presence near their businesses. But Marcus noticed something strange the very first time he saw her. She didn't sit like a homeless person. She sat perfectly upright, alert, controlled, like somebody trained to stay aware even while exhausted. And her eyes never wandered aimlessly the way people expected. They studied everything carefully. Every passing car, every person entering a building, every movement around the street. It unsettled him. The first real interaction happened late one rainy evening after Marcus finished his shift at the grocery store. The manager had thrown away several containers of hot food that were still untouched because company policy required it at closing time. Marcus hated watching good food get wasted, especially knowing people nearby barely had enough to eat. That night he took one container before leaving. As he approached the bus stop, the old woman looked up immediately, almost like she had sensed him coming before hearing his footsteps. "You shouldn't walk alone this late," she said quietly. Marcus stopped. Her voice caught him off guard. It wasn't confused. It wasn't weak. It sounded sharp, calm, disciplined, like someone used to giving instructions. He handed her the food awkwardly. "I just figured you might be hungry." For a second she stared at the container without touching it. Then she looked directly into his eyes. And what she said next stayed with him for weeks. "Most people only see what they're afraid of," she whispered. Very few still see people. Marcus didn't know how to respond to that. He just nodded and started walking away. But before he could leave, she spoke again. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus." The old woman gave a slow nod like she was memorizing it carefully. "Thank you, Marcus Reed." He froze instantly. He never told her his last name. And when he turned back toward her, the old woman had already opened the food container quietly as rain fell around the empty street. From that moment on, something changed. Every evening after work, Marcus brought her something small. Sometimes soup, sometimes sandwiches, sometimes leftover groceries his manager allowed employees to take home before closing. He never told anyone about it, not even his mother. It just became part of his routine. But the more he spoke to her, the stranger things became. Because this woman knew things. Things that made no sense. She spoke with unusual precision. She used military phrases casually without explanation. Sometimes she would stare at passing helicopters overhead and identify the exact model without hesitation. Once, while watching a news report playing through a store window, she quietly corrected details about a military operation overseas before the reporter even finished speaking. Marcus laughed nervously afterward. "How do you know all that stuff?" The old woman looked down at her hands for a long moment. And for the first time since meeting her, he saw pain in her face. "Because some ghosts never really leave the battlefield," she whispered. Marcus didn't fully understand what she meant. But deep down, he knew this woman wasn't who everyone thought she was. And he had no idea that one simple decision, to keep bringing her food every night, was about to pull him into something far bigger, darker, and more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. Because while the entire neighborhood saw a forgotten homeless woman, someone else had been searching for her for years. And very soon, they were coming. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time. Marcus tried to convince himself he was overthinking things after that conversation, but something about the old woman kept staying in his mind long after he returned home each night. It wasn't just the way she spoke. It was the way she observed people. The way she noticed details before anyone else did. Even the way she accepted food felt strange, not desperate, not emotional, just quietly respectful, almost disciplined. Like someone who had once lived a completely different life. For the next several weeks, Marcus continued visiting her after work. And slowly, without realizing it, those late-night conversations became the most important part of his day. At school, Marcus felt invisible. At work, he felt replaceable. At home, he tried not to burden his exhausted mother with his own worries. But sitting beside that abandoned bus stop at night, talking quietly with a homeless woman nobody else cared about, somehow made him feel seen. And the strange part was, she never asked him for anything. Never money, never favors, never sympathy. Sometimes she barely touched the food until after he left. Instead, she asked questions. Questions nobody had ever asked him before. What kind of man do you want to become when nobody's watching? What scares you the most, failure or regret? Do you think loyalty still matters anymore? At first Marcus answered awkwardly, unsure why those conversations even mattered. But over time he found himself opening up in ways he never expected. He told her about wanting to help his mother escape the neighborhood someday. He admitted how angry he felt watching people struggle while others ignored them completely. He talked about how exhausting it was pretending everything was okay all the time. And somehow, she understood. Not in the fake way adults sometimes pretend to understand teenagers. She understood deeply. Once, after Marcus admitted he felt like nobody noticed him unless he made mistakes, the old woman stared quietly at the empty street before speaking. "The world notices noise," she said softly. "But history remembers character." Marcus never forgot that line. One freezing evening, he noticed her coughing badly while trying to pull her blanket tighter against the cold wind. Without thinking, Marcus removed his own hoodie and handed it to her. She looked genuinely startled. "No," she said firmly. "You need this." "I'll survive," Marcus replied. For several seconds she just stared at him silently. Then she accepted it with trembling hands. And that was the first time Marcus saw tears in her eyes. "You remind me of someone," she whispered. Marcus sat beside her quietly. "Who?" But she never answered. Instead, she changed the subject immediately, asking him how school was going. That should have been the moment Marcus realized something much deeper was happening around him. Because after that night, strange things started happening more often. Little things at first. One afternoon while leaving school, Marcus noticed a black SUV parked across the street with tinted windows. The engine remained running, but nobody got out. The next day it appeared again near the grocery store where he worked. Then one evening while bringing food to the old woman, Marcus found two men standing near the bus stop speaking quietly with her. Both wore dark coats despite the warmer weather, and the second Marcus approached, they stopped talking completely. The old woman's face changed instantly when she saw Marcus. Fear. Real fear. It vanished quickly, but Marcus noticed it. The two men walked away without saying a word. Marcus looked at her nervously. Who were they? The old woman didn't answer right away. Instead she scanned the street carefully before leaning closer toward him. "You need to stop coming here for a while." Marcus blinked in confusion. "What? Why?" "Because some people only show up when they've finally found what they've been searching for." Her voice sounded completely different now. Tense. Controlled. Dangerously serious. Marcus tried laughing it off nervously. "Okay, now you're scaring me." But she didn't smile. For the first time since meeting her, the warmth disappeared from her face completely. "Listen to me carefully," she whispered. "If anyone ever asks about me, you don't know anything." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" She looked down at her hands again, almost like she regretted saying too much already. Then quietly, almost painfully, she said something that made Marcus's stomach tighten instantly. "Good people pay the highest price in ugly systems." The wind blew hard through the empty street. Marcus suddenly realized how alone they were. No cars nearby, no voices, no movement except the flickering streetlight above them. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he felt danger crawling up his spine. The old woman slowly reached into her coat pocket and removed a small silver necklace Marcus had seen her wearing every single day since they met. She stared at it silently for several seconds before closing her hand tightly around it. "They should have buried all this years ago," she muttered quietly. Marcus frowned. Who should have? But before she could answer, headlights suddenly turned the corner toward the bus stop. The old woman's entire body stiffened instantly. Marcus had never seen someone react that fast before. Not panic. Training. Pure instinct. She grabbed his wrist hard enough to startle him. And then she said 7 words that Marcus would replay in his mind over and over for the rest of his life. "If they ever come, don't run." Marcus stared at her, completely confused. What does that even mean? But the old woman had already released his arm and stepped back into the shadows near the bus stop. The headlights passed slowly across the street. And for a brief second, Marcus could have sworn the driver was watching them carefully. Then the vehicle continued down the road and disappeared. Marcus looked back toward the woman, waiting for an explanation. But she only sat down quietly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself again like nothing had happened. And somehow, that terrified him even more. That night, Marcus barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the old woman's voice again. "If they ever come, don't run." The words didn't sound dramatic in his memory. They sounded serious, precise, like a warning from someone who understood consequences better than he did. At school the next morning, Marcus couldn't focus. He kept looking out classroom windows expecting to see the same black SUV again. Even small noises made him glance up nervously. By lunchtime he started convincing himself he was imagining things, that maybe the old woman suffered from paranoia after years on the streets. That explanation should have comforted him. Instead, it made him feel worse. Because deep down, Marcus knew she wasn't confused. Everything about her felt intentional. That evening after work, he debated whether he should even go back to the bus stop. But guilt kept eating at him. The temperature had dropped sharply, and despite her warning, he couldn't stop thinking about her sitting out there alone. So he went anyway. And that decision changed everything. The second Marcus turned the corner toward the abandoned bus stop, he felt something was wrong. The shopping cart was gone. The blankets were gone. The old woman was gone. At first he assumed she had moved somewhere nearby to escape the cold. He searched behind nearby buildings, checked the alley beside the laundromat, even walked 2 blocks down the street calling out softly for her. Nothing. No trace. The entire area felt strangely empty. Then Marcus noticed something near the bench. The silver necklace, lying alone on the wet pavement. His chest tightened instantly. He picked it up carefully, staring at the small engraved symbol attached to the chain. It looked military, but unlike anything he recognized. The metal felt surprisingly heavy in his hand. Marcus looked around the empty street again. Hello. No answer. Just distant traffic and cold wind moving through the neighborhood. For the first time since meeting her, genuine fear settled deep in his stomach. Because people don't just disappear overnight, leaving behind the one object they clearly protected. More than anything else, Marcus shoved the necklace into his pocket and hurried home. The entire walk back, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Twice he turned suddenly after hearing footsteps behind him, but nobody was there. By the time he reached his apartment building, his nerves were completely shot. Inside, Denise noticed immediately. "You okay?" Marcus hesitated. Part of him wanted to tell her everything. But how could he explain it without sounding insane? A mysterious homeless woman with military knowledge disappears after warning him about people coming for her. Instead he forced a shrug. Just tired. Denise studied him carefully but didn't push further. She was too exhausted herself after another overnight shift. But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the necklace. Late that night, after his mother went to sleep, he sat alone in his room examining it under his desk lamp. The engraving looked old, worn down from years of use. On the back were tiny numbers scratched into the metal so faintly they were almost impossible to read. And then Marcus noticed something else. Inside the clasp was a hidden compartment. His pulse jumped instantly. He carefully opened it. A tiny folded piece of paper slipped into his hand. Marcus unfolded it slowly. There was only one line written inside. "Trust no one in uniform." Marcus stared at the message in disbelief. His heart started pounding so hard he could hear it. Before he could even process what he was reading, headlights flashed across his bedroom wall from outside. Marcus froze. A black SUV rolled slowly past the apartment building. The same one. This time there was no doubt. The vehicle slowed directly in front of his building for several seconds before continuing down the street. Marcus's breathing became shallow. Someone was definitely watching him now. And suddenly the old woman's warning no longer sounded paranoid. It sounded real. Very real. The next few days became unbearable. Marcus returned to the bus stop repeatedly hoping she'd somehow reappear, but she never did. Nobody in the neighborhood seemed to know anything either. Some people barely remembered her at all. Others claimed she'd probably wandered somewhere else. But Marcus noticed something strange every time he asked questions. People became uncomfortable quickly, like they didn't want to talk about her. Then things got worse. At work, Marcus caught a man in a dark jacket staring at him through the grocery store window for almost 10 straight minutes. When Marcus stepped outside to confront him, the man walked away immediately without speaking. At school, an unfamiliar counselor suddenly called Marcus into the office asking strange questions about whether he'd met any unusual individuals recently. Even his phone began acting strangely. Random static during calls. Battery draining unusually fast. Messages disappearing. Marcus stopped feeling safe anywhere. And still, he had absolutely no idea why. 3 nights after the woman disappeared, Marcus woke suddenly around 2 a.m. to voices outside the apartment building. Low, controlled, military. He moved carefully toward the window and peeked through the blinds. 2 men stood beside another black SUV near the curb. One of them held a photograph. Even from the second floor, Marcus instantly recognized the image. It was the old woman. The other man said something Marcus couldn't hear clearly. Then the first man responded with words that made Marcus's blood run cold. He's been in contact with her for months. Marcus stepped back from the window instantly, heart hammering inside his chest. They were talking about him. And at that exact moment, Marcus realized this situation was far bigger than anything he had imagined. Because whoever that woman truly was, powerful people had been searching for her. And now they knew his name too. From that moment forward, Marcus stopped feeling like a normal teenager living a normal life. Everywhere he went, paranoia followed him. Not the kind people joke about. Real paranoia. The kind that changes how you walk home at night. The kind that makes you check windows before turning on lights. The kind that makes silence feel dangerous. For the next several days, Marcus barely spoke to anyone unless necessary. He went to school, worked his shifts, and returned home without stopping anywhere else. But no matter how carefully he tried convincing himself he was imagining things, the feeling never disappeared. He was being watched, and deep down, he knew it. One afternoon after school, Marcus noticed the same dark SUV parked across from the basketball courts near his apartment complex. The windows were tinted too heavily to see inside, but the engine stayed running the entire time. When Marcus changed direction suddenly, the SUV slowly pulled away too. His stomach tightened immediately. That night he almost told his mother everything. Almost. But Denise already carried enough stress trying to survive. Marcus couldn't bring himself to add more fear to her life without understanding what was actually happening first. So instead, he kept pretending everything was fine. Even though nothing felt fine anymore. The only thing he couldn't stop thinking about was the note hidden inside the necklace. Trust no one in uniform. At first Marcus assumed it referred to police. Then he started wondering if it meant military. Or maybe both. The more he thought about it, the less sense anything made. Who was that woman really? Why were people searching for her? And why did she seem prepared for this to happen? Late Friday evening, Marcus finally made a decision. He was going back to the bus stop one last time. Not because he expected to find her. Because he needed answers. Rain poured heavily that night, soaking the streets almost empty. The neighborhood looked darker than usual under the storm clouds overhead. By the time Marcus reached the abandoned bus stop, water dripped from his hoodie sleeves and shoes. But the second he stepped closer, he froze. Someone was sitting on the bench. Marcus's pulse exploded instantly. For one hopeful second he thought it was her. But it wasn't. It was an older man wearing a dark coat and gloves, sitting perfectly still beneath the flickering streetlight. Waiting. Marcus immediately stepped backward. The man looked up calmly. "You're Marcus Reed." It wasn't a question. Marcus's entire body went tense. "Who are you?" The man ignored the question. "She trusted you." Marcus's breathing sharpened. "Where is she?" For several seconds, the stranger said nothing. Then quietly, almost carefully, he replied, "You were never supposed to meet her." Cold fear crawled through Marcus's chest. The rain grew heavier around them. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. The man studied him silently before speaking again. "She survived longer than anyone expected." Marcus stared at him in confusion. Survived what? Again, the man avoided the question. Instead, his eyes shifted briefly toward Marcus's hoodie pocket. Toward the necklace. Marcus noticed immediately, and instinctively stepped back farther. The stranger's expression changed slightly. Not anger. Concern. Did she give you anything? Marcus's mind screamed not to answer. The note. The warning. Trust no one in uniform. Even though the man wasn't wearing a uniform, something about him felt official. Controlled. Disciplined. Dangerous. Marcus shook his head slowly. The stranger kept staring at him. Then, for the first time, Marcus noticed something underneath the man's coat sleeve. A Marine Corps tattoo. His blood ran cold instantly. The old woman's words echoed in his head again. If they ever come, don't run. The man stood up slowly. Marcus's muscles tightened immediately, ready to bolt if necessary. But the stranger raised his hands calmly. If she left something with you, he said quietly, you need to understand something very carefully. Rain hammered the pavement around them. She was not who you think she was. Marcus swallowed hard. Then who was she? The man looked toward the dark street behind them before answering. A lot of powerful people made terrible decisions 30 years ago. Decisions they buried. Marcus could barely process the words. And she knew the truth. A car suddenly turned the corner nearby. The stranger's face changed instantly. Alert, sharp, almost military. Without another word, he stepped closer to Marcus and lowered his voice. They're already watching you. If they realize she trusted you, he paused. This becomes dangerous. Marcus backed away again. Who's watching me? But before the man could answer, headlights flooded the street. Another black SUV. This one moving fast. The stranger cursed under his breath. And then something happened Marcus would never forget. The older man grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and shoved him hard behind the bus stop bench. Stay down. The SUV screeched to a stop nearby. 3 men stepped out immediately. All wearing dark tactical jackets. Marcus's heart nearly stopped. The stranger stood between them and the bus stopped calmly, rain pouring down his face. One of the men spoke first. You shouldn't be here. The older man replied coldly, neither should you. The tension in the air became suffocating instantly. Marcus crouched silently behind the bench, barely breathing. Then one of the newcomers said something that made his entire body go numb. The boy had contact with her. That makes him part of this now. Boy, they meant him. Marcus suddenly realized this wasn't random anymore. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. Painfully real. The older Marine-looking stranger glanced subtly toward Marcus's hiding spot. And then he said something that completely changed the direction of everything. You people still don't understand why she disappeared in the first place. Nobody moved. Rain crashed against the pavement. The silence felt deadly. Then the stranger spoke 4 words Marcus would never forget. She kept the evidence. And suddenly, every person standing in that storm looked terrified. For several seconds, nobody moved. The rain hammered the street so hard it almost drowned out the sound of Marcus's breathing beneath the bench. Water soaked through his jeans as he crouched there frozen, trying to understand what he had just heard. Evidence. The old woman had kept evidence. Evidence of what? And why did the mention of it suddenly terrify grown men who looked trained for dangerous situations? Marcus watched carefully through the narrow gap beneath the bench as the 3 men near the SUV exchanged tense looks with the older Marine. One of them stepped forward slowly. You don't know where it is, he said coldly. The older man didn't answer immediately. But Marcus noticed something unsettling. He smiled slightly, not because he found anything funny. Because he knew something they didn't. That's what scares you, the older man replied quietly. The atmosphere changed instantly. Marcus could physically feel the tension tightening around them. Another man moved closer, lowering his voice sharply. The situation can still be contained. Contained. Marcus hated the way that word sounded. Like people. Like truth. Like entire lives could simply be sealed away if powerful enough individuals decided it needed to disappear. The older Marine folded his arms slowly. You should have left her alone 30 years ago. The first man's expression hardened immediately. She became unstable. No, the older man snapped. She became inconvenient. Marcus felt chills crawl across his skin. None of this sounded normal anymore. This sounded dangerous. Very dangerous. One of the men suddenly glanced toward the bus stop itself. Toward Marcus's hiding place. Marcus stopped breathing instantly. For one horrifying second he thought they saw him. But before anything happened, the older Marine shifted deliberately into their line of sight again. "She trusted the kid for a reason," he said. The tallest man narrowed his eyes. "You made contact with him too. I'm trying to prevent you from making another mistake." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush the air itself. Then the tallest man said something that made Marcus's stomach twist violently. The order was never supposed to escalate this far. Order. Marcus's mind raced. What order? Who gave it? And suddenly, for the first time, he began realizing something terrifying. The homeless woman's disappearance wasn't accidental. This had been happening long before he ever met her. The older Marine looked exhausted suddenly. Older. Burdened. "She gave everything to that country," he muttered quietly. "And you buried her like she never existed." Nobody answered him. That silence alone told Marcus more than words ever could. Because innocent people deny accusations. Guilty people avoid them. Then the older Marine slowly reached into his coat pocket. Every man near the SUV instantly stiffened. Marcus's heart pounded violently. But instead of a weapon, the older man removed a folded photograph. Even from a distance, Marcus recognized the old woman immediately. Only this picture looked different. Much different. She looked younger, confident, standing beside several Marines in formal military clothing. Marcus's mind struggled to process it. The old homeless woman was military. The older Marine stared at the photo quietly before speaking again. Her name was Evelyn Cross. The men near the SUV remained silent. "She saved lives most people will never know about," he continued. "And when she learned what really happened," his jaw tightened. "You abandoned her." Marcus felt something shift inside him hearing that. Because suddenly the old woman wasn't just a mysterious stranger anymore. She was someone broken by something huge. Something powerful. And somehow, Marcus had become connected to it. One of the men finally stepped forward impatiently. "Enough. Where's the evidence?" The older Marine slowly folded the photo again. "You still don't get it." Rainwater dripped from his face as he looked directly toward the SUV headlights. "She planned for this." Marcus's pulse quickened instantly. "Planned for what?" The man continued quietly. "She knew eventually someone would find her again." Another long silence followed. Then the tallest man asked the question Marcus himself had been terrified to ask. "Did she pass it to the boy?" Every muscle in Marcus's body locked instantly. The older Marine didn't answer. And somehow, that was worse, because the silence itself became an answer. The men near the SUV suddenly looked far more alarmed than before. One cursed under his breath. Another immediately reached for a phone. Marcus's heart slammed against his ribs. They thought he had the evidence. But he didn't. At least, he didn't think he did. Unless, his hand instinctively touched the necklace hidden inside his hoodie pocket. The older Marine noticed immediately. And for the briefest second, their eyes met. Marcus saw it clearly. Recognition. Not fear. Not suspicion. Recognition. The older man knew Marcus had something. Before Marcus could react, the older Marine spoke sharply. "The boy doesn't even understand what he's holding." The tallest man's expression darkened instantly. "That makes him a liability." Liability. Marcus's blood went ice cold. Because now he understood exactly what kind of people these were. The older Marine took one dangerous step forward. "No," he said firmly. "That's exactly where you're wrong." The rainstorm intensified around them. Thunder rolled across the sky overhead. And then, for the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus saw genuine anger in the older man's eyes. She trusted him because he showed her more humanity in 6 months than this system showed her in 30 years. Nobody spoke. The words hit hard enough to silence everyone. Then the older Marine turned slightly toward the bus stop, toward Marcus, and in a calm voice that somehow cut through the storm itself, he said, "Marcus, run." Everything exploded into motion instantly. Marcus didn't think. The second the word left the older Marine's mouth, instinct took over. He bolted. His shoes slammed against wet pavement as shouts erupted behind him. The storm blurred his vision while thunder cracked overhead, but adrenaline drowned out everything except one terrifying realization. These people were willing to hunt him. Marcus sprinted through the narrow alley beside the laundromat, nearly slipping on rain-soaked concrete. Behind him, doors slammed and footsteps pounded hard against the street. "Stop him!" The voice echoed through the storm. Marcus's lungs burned instantly, but fear pushed him faster. He jumped over overflowing trash bags, cut between two apartment buildings, and burst onto another street 3 blocks away. Cars honked as he ran across traffic blindly. His heart felt ready to explode. He had no idea where he was going, only that he couldn't let them catch him. Because the moment they called him a liability, everything changed. The necklace inside his pocket bounced violently against his chest as he ran. Marcus gripped it tightly without slowing down. Somehow, whatever was connected to that necklace had become important enough to terrify trained men. And that meant the old woman had trusted him with something bigger than he understood. Marcus ducked behind a closed convenience store, gasping for air. Rainwater poured from his hoodie as he pressed himself against the wall trying to listen. Footsteps, voices, close, too close. Then headlights swept slowly across the street nearby. The black SUV. Searching. Marcus covered his mouth instinctively, terrified they'd hear his breathing. The vehicle rolled past slowly enough that Marcus caught brief glimpses of the men inside. Their faces looked tense now. Urgent. Nothing like law enforcement. These weren't people trying to help him. They were trying to contain something. The SUV disappeared around the corner. Marcus waited several more seconds before moving again. His hands shook uncontrollably as he pulled out his phone. 1 bar of battery left. Of course, he tried calling his mother immediately. No signal. Then the screen glitched violently before going black completely. Marcus stared at it in disbelief. Dead. A sudden memory hit him hard. The old woman's warning, "Trust no one in uniform." And another, "If they ever come, don't run." She knew this would happen. Somehow, she knew. Marcus forced himself forward again, moving carefully. Now instead of running blindly. Every passing car made him flinch. Every shadow felt threatening. But one terrifying thought kept growing louder in his mind. If these people were willing to chase him through the streets, what would happen if they went to his house? Panic surged through him instantly. His mother. Marcus took off running again. By the time he reached his apartment building, exhaustion was tearing through his legs. He rounded the final corner. And froze. 3 black SUVs sat outside the building. Marcus's stomach dropped instantly. Men stood near the entrance speaking into radios. The apartment lights upstairs were on. His home. They were already there. Marcus backed into the shadows immediately, breathing hard as fear crashed over him in waves. How did they move this fast? Unless they had already been watching him long before tonight. The realization hit like ice water. This was planned. Every bit of it. Marcus stared toward his apartment windows desperately. Then suddenly, his mother appeared at the window. Terrified. Looking directly outside. One of the men inside the building must have said something because Denise shook her head violently. Marcus had never seen that expression on her face before. Pure fear. His chest tightened painfully. He needed to get to her. But he couldn't just run toward the building now. Not with them waiting. As Marcus stood hidden between 2 parked cars trying to think, a quiet voice suddenly spoke behind him. "You're making yourself predictable." Marcus spun around violently. The older Marine stood there in the darkness, completely soaked from rain. Marcus nearly stumbled backward. "How did you? We don't have much time." The older man grabbed Marcus's arm and pulled him deeper into the alley before continuing. "They tracked you faster than I expected." Marcus yanked his arm free. "Who are these people?" The older Marine looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like a man carrying something heavy for decades. "Some are government," he said quietly. "Some are former military. Some are simply people protecting careers and reputations." Marcus stared at him in disbelief. All this over a homeless woman. The older man's expression hardened immediately. "She wasn't homeless to us." "Us." Marcus caught the word instantly. "You knew her." The Marine looked toward the apartment building silently for a moment before answering. "She saved my life once." Something about the way he said it carried deep guilt. Marcus shook his head, overwhelmed. "None of this makes sense." "It will." The older man reached into his coat slowly. Marcus tensed immediately, but the Marine only handed him a small folded envelope. "Don't open this yet." Marcus stared at it cautiously. "What is it?" "The reason they're afraid." Before Marcus could ask another question, movement near the apartment building suddenly intensified. One of the men stepped outside speaking angrily into a radio. Another pointed down the street. "Searching." The Marine cursed quietly. "They know you're close." Marcus's pulse spiked again. "I need to get my mother out of there." "You can't." The answer came instantly. Cold, certain. Marcus looked at him in shock. "They'll use her to force you out." Fear twisted violently in Marcus's stomach. "No." The Marine grabbed Marcus's shoulder firmly. "Listen to me carefully. Evelyn trusted you because she believed you'd do the right thing when this moment came." Marcus's breathing shook. "I'm just a kid." For the first time, the older Marine's expression softened slightly. "No," he said quietly. "You're the first good thing she believed in for a very long time." Those words hit Marcus harder than expected. Then suddenly, lights flooded the alley. A vehicle turning directly toward them. The Marine reacted instantly. "Move." Everything happened fast after that. Doors slammed. Voices shouted. Flashlights cut through the rain. Marcus and the older Marine ran deeper into the alley as multiple men poured into the street behind them. But just before disappearing around the corner, Marcus glanced back one final time toward his apartment window. And what he saw made his blood run cold. His mother stood inside crying, while one of the men calmly held up a photograph. A photograph of him. And at that exact moment, Marcus realized something horrifying. This was never about finding the old woman anymore. Now, it was about finding whatever she left behind. Marcus ran until his lungs felt shredded. Rain soaked through every layer of clothing as he followed the older Marine through back alleys, abandoned lots, and empty side streets far away from the apartment complex. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were footsteps splashing through puddles and distant sirens echoing across the city. Marcus's mind felt completely overloaded. Only a week earlier, his biggest worries involved school, rent, and helping his mother survive another month. Now armed men were searching for him in the middle of the night because of a homeless woman nobody else even cared about. None of it felt real anymore. Finally, after what felt like forever, the Marine led Marcus into an abandoned auto repair garage hidden behind an old warehouse district near the edge of the city. The building looked forgotten, half covered in rust and graffiti, but the second they entered, Marcus realized someone had been using it recently. Lanterns. Bottled water. Old military maps spread across a workbench. The Marine locked the door carefully behind them before speaking for the first time since escaping. "We've got maybe an hour before they trace this location too." Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "Who are you?" The older man removed his soaked coat slowly. "My name is Daniel Mercer." Marcus immediately noticed the scars covering Daniel's arms. Not random scars. Combat scars. Daniel sat heavily near the workbench, exhaustion visible in every movement. "I served with Evelyn Cross 32 years ago." Marcus's chest tightened hearing her real name again. Evelyn. Not just the homeless woman. A real person. A real history. Daniel rubbed his face tiredly before continuing. There were 6 of us assigned to a classified Marine intelligence operation overseas during the early 90s. His eyes darkened. Officially, the mission never existed. Marcus stood silently listening. Something went wrong, Daniel continued quietly. Very wrong. The room felt colder suddenly. People died. Daniel looked directly at him. Good people. Marcus swallowed hard. And Evelyn found out why. The silence afterward felt heavy. Marcus slowly pulled the silver necklace from his pocket and placed it carefully on the table. Daniel stared at it for several seconds without touching it. She never took that off, he whispered. Marcus reached into his hoodie again and removed the folded note hidden inside the clasp. Daniel read it once, then closed his eyes painfully. Yeah, he muttered. That sounds like her. Marcus crossed his arms tightly. You still haven't explained why they're chasing me. Daniel looked at the necklace again. Because Evelyn never trusted systems after what happened. And because if she gave you this, he pointed at the necklace. Then she believed you were safer than anyone connected to the military. Marcus almost laughed bitterly. Well, she was wrong. Daniel didn't respond. That silence said, enough. Marcus paced anxiously across the garage. My mother's still back there. I know. I need to go get her. You walk back into that apartment tonight and they'll take everything from you. Marcus stopped pacing immediately. What does that mean? Daniel's voice lowered. It means there are people involved in this who spent 30 years protecting secrets powerful enough to destroy careers, reputations, maybe worse. Marcus stared at him. All because of one mission. Daniel's jaw tightened. No, because of what they did after the mission. The lantern light flickered softly around the garage. Then Daniel slowly opened the envelope he had given Marcus earlier. Inside was a photograph. Marcus moved closer carefully. The image showed a younger Evelyn standing beside several Marines outside what looked like a military compound overseas. But one detail immediately caught Marcus's attention. Evelyn wasn't standing beside them. She stood in front, like she was the leader. Marcus looked up slowly. She was important. Daniel gave a tired nod. She was one of the best intelligence officers I ever saw. Marcus struggled to connect that image with the quiet homeless woman at the bus stop. How does someone like that end up forgotten on the street? Daniel looked away. Because powerful institutions protect themselves before they protect people. The words hung in the air heavily. Marcus suddenly thought about every person who walked past Evelyn daily pretending she didn't exist. And now Marines were hunting for evidence connected to her past. The contrast made him feel sick. Daniel carefully pulled another document from the envelope. Old classified files. Marcus could barely understand most of the military terminology, but several words stood out instantly. Unauthorized operation. Civilian casualties. Cover up. Marcus's breathing slowed. This is what she kept. Daniel nodded. She copied evidence before they could destroy it. Marcus looked up sharply. Then why didn't she expose them years ago? Daniel's expression became painful again. Because after what happened, nobody knew who could be trusted anymore. The room fell silent. Then Marcus asked the question that had been haunting him since this nightmare started. What happened to her? Daniel took a long breath. When Evelyn tried reporting the truth internally, they turned on her. Said she was unstable, dangerous, compromised. His voice hardened. Everything was stripped away from her piece by piece. Marcus felt anger building inside him. So they destroyed her life. Daniel looked directly at him. They erased it. That sentence hit Marcus harder than anything else. Because suddenly he understood the true horror of Evelyn's story. Not just betrayal, erasure. The system she served had abandoned her so completely that she disappeared into homelessness while the world forgot her name. And somehow, despite all that pain, she still chose kindness toward him. Marcus sat down slowly, overwhelmed. I don't understand why she trusted me. Daniel answered immediately. Because you treated her like she mattered. The simplicity of that answer crushed Marcus emotionally. All those months, all he did was bring her food and talk to her. But to someone abandoned by the entire world, that small kindness became everything. Suddenly, a sharp electronic beep echoed inside the garage. Daniel's head snapped toward a small military scanner device near the workbench. His face changed instantly. "What is it?" Marcus asked. Daniel stared at the screen grimly. "They found us." Marcus's pulse exploded. "How?" Daniel grabbed the files quickly. "The necklace." Marcus froze. Daniel looked directly at him. "She must have known they tagged it years ago." Marcus's stomach dropped. "She gave it to me on purpose." Daniel didn't answer immediately, but when he finally spoke, his voice sounded almost haunted. "No," he said quietly. "She used it to lead them away from something else." Marcus stared at him in shock. "What something else?" Daniel looked toward the garage door as distant engines echoed outside in the storm. Then he said the words that changed everything again. "The real evidence was never in the necklace." Marcus felt his entire body go cold. "The real evidence was never in the necklace." The words echoed through the garage while distant engines rumbled closer outside. For a moment Marcus just stared at Daniel, unable to process what he'd heard. "If the necklace wasn't the evidence," he said slowly, "then what was the point of all this?" Daniel moved quickly around the garage gathering files and stuffing equipment into an old military duffel bag. The necklace was bait. Marcus blinked in disbelief. "Bait?" Daniel nodded grimly. "Evelyn knew they were watching her long before you met her." He zipped the bag shut violently. "And if she suddenly disappeared, they'd immediately search anyone connected to her." Marcus's chest tightened. "She planned this." Daniel stopped moving for a second. "Yes." The realization hit Marcus harder than he expected. All those quiet conversations, the strange questions, the warnings, even the moment she gave him the necklace. Evelyn already knew what was coming. And somehow, she chose him anyway. Marcus shook his head slowly. "Why me?" Daniel looked at him carefully. "Because people like Evelyn learn to read character better than files." Before Marcus could respond, headlights suddenly swept across the garage windows outside. Daniel instantly killed the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room. "Down," he whispered sharply. Marcus dropped beside the workbench as multiple vehicles rolled into the warehouse district outside. Doors slammed. Voices echoed faintly through the storm. They found them. Fast. Too fast. Marcus's breathing became shallow again. Daniel slowly pulled a handgun from the back of his waistband. Marcus stared at it nervously. "You expecting a fight?" Daniel checked the weapon calmly. "I'm expecting desperation." Outside, flashlights cut through the rain between abandoned buildings. Marcus heard someone shouting coordinates into a radio. Military precision, not random searching. Daniel crouched beside him quietly. "Listen carefully," he whispered. "If we get separated, you do not go home. My mother, they'll be watching her." Marcus clenched his fists painfully. Fear mixed with helpless anger inside his chest. This whole nightmare kept pulling innocent people deeper into danger. Outside, footsteps crunched across wet gravel. Closer now. Marcus's pulse hammered so loudly he thought they'd hear it. Then suddenly, bang! The garage's outer metal gate rattled violently. Another bang followed immediately after. "They're here," Marcus whispered. Daniel nodded once. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of preparing to fight, Daniel reached into the duffel bag and removed a thin black folder. He handed it directly to Marcus. Marcus frowned. "What is this?" Daniel's expression turned deadly serious. "This is why Evelyn disappeared." Marcus stared at the folder nervously. "Open it later," Daniel warned. "Not here." Another violent bang shook the garage door. "Daniel Mercer," someone shouted outside. "This ends tonight." Marcus's blood froze. They knew his full name. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he muttered quietly. "That's what I'm afraid of." The metal door groaned loudly as pressure slammed against it. Again, Marcus looked toward the only back exit. "There's too many." Daniel gave a grim nod. I know. For the first time since meeting him, Marcus saw something terrifying in Daniel's face. Not fear for himself. Fear of failing. He turned toward Marcus sharply. No matter what happens next, you protect that folder. Marcus looked down at it. What's inside? Daniel's eyes hardened. The truth. The garage door suddenly burst inward with a deafening crash. Flashlights flooded the darkness instantly. Move. Voices exploded from every direction. Daniel reacted immediately, grabbing Marcus and shoving him toward the rear exit. Go. Marcus stumbled backward as armed men stormed into the garage. For one horrifying second Marcus froze completely. Not police. Not ordinary military. Tactical teams. Weapons drawn. Faces hard. Professional. Daniel raised his weapon, but instead of firing, he kicked over a metal shelf between them, buying seconds of chaos. Run, Marcus. Marcus finally moved. He sprinted through the back exit into pouring rain as shouting erupted behind him. Then, gunshots. Marcus nearly lost his footing. The sound echoed violently through the warehouse district. More shouting followed. Marcus kept running blindly through darkness, gripping the black folder tightly against his chest. His mind screamed one question over and over. Did they just kill Daniel? Tears mixed with rain across his face as panic consumed him completely. He barely knew this man. But Daniel had risked everything to protect him. To protect Evelyn's truth. Marcus turned sharply between abandoned buildings, desperate to escape the chaos behind him. But then, a bright light suddenly blinded him. A vehicle blocked the alley ahead. Marcus stopped instantly. Another SUV. His stomach dropped. The driver's door opened slowly. Marcus backed away immediately, clutching the folder tighter. But the person stepping out wasn't one of the tactical men. It was Denise. Marcus froze. Mom. She ran toward him instantly, grabbing his face in panic. Oh my God, Marcus. Marcus hugged her tightly, almost collapsing emotionally. How did you? They took me from the apartment, she whispered shakily. Said they needed to protect me. Marcus pulled back immediately. Protect. That word again. His eyes shifted toward the SUV. A man still sat inside watching them quietly. Not tactical gear. Military posture. Marcus's instinct screamed instantly. Denise noticed his expression. What's wrong? Marcus stepped backward slowly. Mom, get away from that vehicle. Confusion crossed her face. What? The man inside the SUV finally stepped out calmly. Tall, older, perfect posture. And unlike the others, he wore a Marine dress uniform. Marcus's heart dropped instantly. The note. Trust no one in uniform. The officer studied Marcus carefully before speaking. Evelyn always did have terrible timing. Marcus tightened his grip on the folder immediately. The officer's eyes shifted toward it. And for the first time all night, Marcus saw genuine danger hidden beneath someone's calm smile. Then the officer said something that made Marcus realize this situation was even bigger than he imagined. She should have destroyed those files 30 years ago. Marcus didn't move. Not even when the rain soaked through his clothes completely. Not even when his mother stepped slightly closer to the Marine officer, confused and unaware of the tension building in the air like a tightening wire. She should have destroyed those files 30 years ago. The words hung there. Calm, controlled, dangerously certain. Marcus slowly tightened his grip on the black folder under his arm. You're not taking this, Marcus said. Quietly. The officer didn't react immediately. Instead, his eyes flicked briefly toward Denise. Then back to Marcus. That folder doesn't belong to you, he said. Marcus swallowed hard. Then why are you so worried about it? A flicker of irritation crossed the officer's face for the first time. Not anger. Concern. Like something wasn't going according to plan. Behind him, Marcus noticed movement in the distance. More vehicles. More headlights cutting through the rain. The situation was escalating fast again. Denise stepped closer to Marcus. Baby, what is going on? Marcus didn't answer her. He couldn't. Because everything inside him was screaming that the person standing in front of him, despite the uniform, despite the calm tone, was exactly what Evelyn had warned him about. The officer sighed softly. "You don't understand what you're holding," he said again. Marcus shook his head. "Then explain it." For a moment, the officer studied him carefully, as if deciding how much truth was safe to give. Then he spoke. What Evelyn Cross stole wasn't just evidence of wrongdoing. It was evidence of authorization. Marcus frowned. Authorization for what? The officer's voice lowered slightly. Operations that were never supposed to leave classified status. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. Denise looked between them, more confused than ever. The officer continued. "If that folder becomes public, it won't just damage reputations. It will dismantle entire careers, entire systems, entire chains of command." Marcus's grip tightened again. "So people died and you want it buried?" The officer didn't deny it. Instead, he stepped closer. "People died in war," he said firmly. "But what she took goes beyond war. It proves negligence at levels civilians will never understand correctly." Marcus stared at him. "And that justifies hunting a woman until she ends up homeless." Silence. That silence was the first crack in the officer's composure. Denise suddenly spoke, voice shaking. "Marcus, who is this man?" Marcus finally looked at her. "I don't think he's here to protect us, Mom." The officer's gaze sharpened immediately. "You're being manipulated," he said. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "By who?" "The homeless woman you erased from existence." The officer's jaw tightened slightly. And for the first time, Marcus saw something real behind his controlled expression. Frustration. Not at Marcus. At Evelyn. "She refused every order," the officer said quietly. "Every directive. Every containment protocol. She chose her own narrative instead of following procedure." Marcus stepped forward slightly. "She chose to be honest." The officer didn't respond immediately. Then, softly, "She chose to become dangerous." That word hit harder than expected. Dangerous. Not criminal. Not unstable. Dangerous. Marcus looked down at the folder again. His hands were shaking now. Behind them, vehicles continued to arrive. The alley was slowly filling with lights, shadows, and silhouettes. They were being surrounded again. Denise grabbed Marcus's arm tightly. "Marcus, we need to leave." But there was nowhere left to go. The officer exhaled slowly. "This is your last chance," he said. "Hand it over, and your life returns to normal." Marcus looked up sharply. "Normal," he repeated. He glanced at the growing number of vehicles. At the armed men positioning themselves. At the way everything was closing in again. "This is your version of normal." The officer's expression hardened slightly. "Normal means your mother goes home safely tonight." That hit differently. Denise froze slightly at those words. Marcus noticed immediately. The manipulation, the pressure, the leverage. It wasn't negotiation. It was control. Marcus stepped back instinctively. "No," he said quietly. The officer's eyes narrowed. "No." Marcus tightened his grip on the folder. "She told me not to trust people in uniform." A pause. The rain seemed louder in that moment. The officer's calm finally cracked just slightly. "You think she was protecting you?" he asked. Marcus didn't answer. The officer took another step forward. "She was protecting herself through you." Denise gasped softly. Marcus shook his head. "That's not true." But doubt had already started creeping in. The officer saw it, and pressed harder. "She used you as a carrier," he said. "A fallback. A way to move classified material without triggering internal tracking systems." Marcus's breathing quickened. "That's not." But he stopped. Because he didn't actually know. He never really knew why she chose him. Why she trusted him. Why she disappeared and left everything behind. The officer noticed the hesitation immediately. And that was enough. "Give me the folder, Marcus," he said more firmly now. "This doesn't end well for you if you don't." Denise stepped between them suddenly. "No," she said firmly. Both men looked at her. For the first time that night, Denise's voice carried something stronger than fear. "Whatever this is," she said, "you are not taking my son into it." Marcus looked at her, surprised. The officer sighed. "This is not your decision," he said calmly. Denise didn't move. "I don't care." Silence. The officer looked past her to Marcus again. And in a lower voice, he said something that changed everything again. "She didn't just leave you evidence, Marcus." Marcus frowned. The officer continued. "She left instructions." Marcus's heart dropped instantly. "What instructions?" The officer studied him carefully. And then finally said, "To expose us." A long silence followed. Even the rain felt quieter. Marcus looked down at the black folder in his hands again. For the first time, he understood something terrifying. This wasn't just about what Evelyn knew. It was about what she intended. And somewhere deep inside all of this, he was already part of her final decision. Marcus felt like the ground under him had shifted. To expose us. Those three words didn't sound like information. They sounded like a trigger being pulled. The rain kept falling, but everything around him felt strangely still now, like the world had narrowed down to just three people standing in an alley surrounded by slowly tightening headlights. Marcus looked down at the black folder again. For the first time since he got it, it didn't feel like a random object. It felt heavy in a different way. Intentional. Deliberate. Like it had been placed in his hands long before he ever met Evelyn Cross. Denise stepped closer to Marcus again, voice shaking but firm. "Marcus, give it to them," she whispered. "We don't know what this is. We don't know what it could do to us." That sentence hit him harder than anything else. Because she wasn't wrong. He didn't know. But then he looked at the officer again. Calm, controlled, patient in a way that felt practiced. And Marcus realized something that made his stomach twist. This man wasn't afraid of violence. He was afraid of exposure. That meant the folder wasn't just dangerous. It was real. The officer noticed Marcus's hesitation fading. His expression tightened slightly. "You're a smart boy," he said. "Don't let grief turn you into a liability." Marcus flinched at the word again. Liability. They kept using it like people were assets, problems, threats. Not human beings. Marcus spoke quietly. "You keep saying she left instructions," he said. "But what if she didn't leave them for you?" The officer narrowed his eyes slightly. Marcus continued. "What if she left them for whoever still had a conscience?" That line changed the air instantly. Denise looked at him sharply. Even the officer paused for a fraction of a second. Just long enough for Marcus to notice. Then the officer's voice hardened again. "She was compromised," he said. "Emotionally unstable at the end." Marcus shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "She wasn't unstable. She was alone." Silence followed. A different kind this time. Heavier. More uncomfortable. Because nobody denied it immediately. And Marcus felt something shift inside him. Like a door slowly closing. Or opening. He didn't know which yet. Behind the officer, more figures were now visible between the vehicles. Not rushing. Not chaotic. Coordinated. Every movement controlled. This wasn't a search anymore. It was containment. Marcus slowly tightened his grip on the folder. Then he asked the question he had been avoiding since the moment this started. "What happens if I open it?" The officer's answer came instantly. "You stop being protected." Denise inhaled sharply. Marcus nodded slowly. "So I am being protected right now." The officer didn't respond, and that silence was enough. Marcus looked at his mother. Really looked at her. Tired, confused, terrified, dragged into something she never asked for. Then he looked at the officer. And then at the men behind him. And something inside Marcus stopped being afraid. It didn't become brave. It became clear. "If I give you this," Marcus said slowly, "you leave my mother alone." The officer nodded immediately. Yes. Too quickly. Too clean. Too rehearsed. Marcus noticed that. Denise grabbed his arm tighter. "Marcus, no." But Marcus didn't look at her. He was watching the officer now, trying to read what wasn't being said. Then Marcus spoke again. "And Evelyn." A pause. A fraction of hesitation. "Just enough." "Evelyn is already gone," the officer said. Marcus felt something inside him snap at that sentence. Not rage, not sadness, clarity. Because that was the first time someone in uniform said something that felt rehearsed, like a conclusion, not a truth. Marcus slowly opened the folder. Denise gasped. "Marcus." But he kept going. Inside were pages, stamped documents, reports, photographs, names, dates, redacted sections marked with black blocks. And one thing that stood out more than anything else. A handwritten letter on top. Marcus lifted it carefully. The officer's voice sharpened immediately. "Stop." But Marcus was already reading. And the moment his eyes moved across the first line, everything else disappeared. It wasn't long, just a few sentences, but they hit harder than anything he had experienced so far. Evelyn's handwriting, clear, controlled, unmistakably deliberate. Marcus read silently. "If you are reading this, it means they found you. That means I failed to hide long enough. But you were chosen for a reason. Not because you are strong. Not because you are trained. But because you are still able to feel what they stopped feeling long ago." Marcus's breath caught. Denise stared at him, frozen. The officer stepped forward again. "Put it down," he said sharply. But Marcus kept reading. His voice came out quieter now. "They will tell you I was unstable. They will tell you I misinterpreted what I saw. They will tell you it is classified for national protection." Marcus swallowed hard. "But the truth is simple." He stopped for a second. His hands trembled. Then he continued. "They protected themselves first." Silence dropped over everything. Even the rain seemed distant now. Marcus looked up slowly. The officer's face had changed. Not anger. Not frustration. Something colder. Final. Marcus understood immediately. That letter wasn't just information. It was confirmation. The officer exhaled slowly. "Now you understand," he said quietly, "why this cannot leave your hands." Marcus tightened his grip on the folder again. "No," he said. The officer's eyes narrowed. "No." Marcus looked at his mother. Then back at him. "I understand something else now." The officer waited. Marcus's voice was steady now. "I understand why she trusted me." A long silence followed. Then Marcus closed the folder slowly. Not handing it over. Not running. Not obeying. Just holding it. Choosing. And for the first time that night, the men in uniform looked unsure of what he would do next. The uncertainty didn't last long. The officer's expression hardened again, like whatever hesitation had appeared for a moment was quickly buried under training, discipline, and decades of conditioning. "Marcus," he said more firmly now, "this is your final warning." But Marcus didn't respond immediately. He was still holding the folder. Still feeling the weight of Evelyn's words pressing into him like something alive. They protected themselves first. That line kept repeating in his head. Not as emotion, as pattern, as confirmation. Denise stepped closer again, voice trembling. "Baby, please, just give it to them. We can leave. We can go somewhere else. We don't need this." Marcus finally looked at her. And for a moment, he saw exactly what she was afraid of. Not just the men, not just the weapons, but losing him. That realization hit Marcus harder than anything else so far. Because none of this started with power or government or secrets. It started with him bringing food to someone nobody else cared about. And somehow that simple act had dragged his entire life into this. Marcus lowered the folder slightly. The officer immediately noticed a subtle shift in posture, like a predator recognizing movement. "That's better," the officer said calmly. "You're making the right choice." But Marcus didn't open it. He just held it tighter. And then he asked a question that changed the air completely. "If I give this to you," Marcus said quietly, "how do I know you won't erase it like you erased her?" Denise froze. The officer didn't answer immediately. That pause mattered. Marcus felt it, because hesitation meant truth was being filtered. Finally, the officer spoke. "You don't understand how systems work, Marcus." Marcus shook his head slightly. "I understand enough." The officer's jaw tightened. "There are things that cannot be made public without consequences you cannot imagine." Marcus stepped forward one small step. "Then maybe the problem is the consequences," he said. That line landed differently. Even Denise looked at him like she didn't fully recognize him in that moment. The officer's expression darkened. "You are standing in a situation far above your understanding," he said. Marcus nodded slowly. "Maybe," he replied, "but I know what I saw. A beat. I saw a woman nobody cared about except when it became convenient for you to call her unstable." Silence. Rain poured harder now. The alley felt smaller, closer, like everything was tightening around them. Behind the officer, one of the men shifted slightly. A radio crackled softly. Marcus heard a phrase through the noise. "Extraction not authorized yet." Extraction. Not arrest. Not rescue. Extraction. Marcus felt his stomach drop slightly. Because that word meant they were still deciding what he was. The officer noticed Marcus's reaction and stepped forward again. "This is not personal," he said more softly now. "This is containment. Nothing more." Marcus let out a short, bitter breath. Everything is personal when someone loses their life for it. That sentence hit harder than expected. Even Denise looked down slightly, pain crossing her face. The officer stared at Marcus for a long moment. Then he said something quieter. "She was not supposed to survive that operation." Marcus frowned. "What operation?" The officer hesitated again. That hesitation was becoming a pattern now. Marcus noticed it more clearly with every second. Finally, the officer spoke. "There was a breach. Internal. Classified intelligence was compromised. People died because of it." Marcus didn't move. "And you're saying she caused it?" The officer shook his head slightly. "No." That single word changed everything. Marcus blinked. "No." The officer's expression tightened. "She discovered it." Silence hit like a physical force. Denise covered her mouth slightly. Marcus's grip on the folder loosened just a fraction. "Then why?" Marcus started. But the officer cut him off. "Because the people responsible were not external enemies." Marcus's mind slowed. The rain seemed louder again. The officer stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They were inside." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "You mean, military?" The officer didn't answer directly. But he didn't need to. Marcus slowly looked down at the folder again. The redacted names, the stamped warnings, the signatures. Then he looked back up. "You're part of it," Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. The officer didn't deny it. That silence confirmed everything. Denise stepped back slightly now, realization hitting her face too. Marcus felt his heart pounding harder. "So she didn't just get abandoned," Marcus said slowly. "She got silenced." The officer's expression tightened. "Marcus." But Marcus raised his hand. "No," he said firmly. "You don't get to explain it away anymore." A long silence followed. Then Marcus made a decision. Not fast, not emotional, clear. He closed the folder and stepped backward. Denise immediately moved toward him. "Marcus, what are you doing?" But Marcus didn't look at her yet. He was watching the officer. The officer's posture changed instantly. "Do not do something you cannot undo," he said. Marcus nodded slightly. "I'm not." Then he looked at his mother and softly said, "Run." Denise froze. "What?" Marcus stepped closer to her. "They're not protecting you," he whispered. "They're controlling the situation. There's a difference." The officer's voice sharpened immediately. "Marcus, stop this." But Marcus had already made his choice. He grabbed Denise's hand and pulled her backward into the rain. The officer's voice cut through the storm instantly. "Stop them." Everything exploded into motion, but Marcus was already moving. Not blindly this time, not panicked, focused. And as they ran, Clutching the folder tightly under his arm, Marcus realized something terrifying. This was no longer about what Evelyn left behind. It was about what they were willing to destroy to get it back. Marcus and Denise ran through the rain like the world itself was chasing them. But this time, Marcus wasn't just running in fear. He was running with understanding. Every step now carried a different weight, because the truth wasn't just in his hands anymore. It was in his decisions. Behind them, voices echoed through the alley. Footsteps followed. Vehicles repositioned somewhere nearby. The system wasn't panicking. It was adapting. And that terrified Marcus more than anything. Because panic meant chaos. Adaptation meant control. Marcus. Denise gasped as they turned a corner sharply, nearly slipping on wet pavement. "Where are we going?" "I don't know," he admitted honestly, pulling her forward. "But not back there." Denise's breathing was heavy, panic rising in her voice. "Those men said they were military. They said they were protecting us." Marcus cut her off immediately. "They said what made them sound safe," he replied sharply, "not what's actually true." That made her go quiet. Not because she agreed, but because she knew him. And she could hear it in his voice. He wasn't guessing anymore. They turned into a darker street lined with closed shops and flickering lights. Marcus slowed slightly, scanning their surroundings. Every reflection in the glass felt like a possibility of someone watching. The folder was still under his arm. Heavy, real, alive with consequences. Denise suddenly grabbed his wrist. "Marcus, I can't do this," she whispered. "I don't understand any of it." Marcus stopped. Rain poured between them. For a moment, he just looked at her. Really looked at her. Exhausted, terrified, still trying to protect him even while being pulled into danger she never chose. And Marcus felt something inside him shift again. Not fear, responsibility. He lowered his voice. "I'm not asking you to understand it," he said. "I'm asking you to trust me right now." Denise shook her head slightly. "Trust you into what?" Marcus hesitated, because he didn't fully know anymore. But he knew one thing for sure. Going back was not survival. It was surrender. Behind them, a distant engine revved sharply. Both of them froze instantly. Headlights appeared at the end of the street. Slow, controlled, deliberate. Denise stepped back instinctively. "No, no, no." Marcus grabbed her hand again. "Move." They ran. But this time it was different. The SUV didn't rush. It followed, like it already knew where they were going. Marcus realized that immediately. "They're tracking us," he muttered. Denise looked at him, terrified. "How?" Marcus didn't answer. Because he already knew part of it. The necklace. The surveillance. The systems Evelyn had been warning about. Everything was connected. They turned into a narrow passage between buildings, barely wide enough for two people. Marcus pushed Denise forward first, then followed quickly behind. The SUV stopped at the entrance. But didn't enter. That was worse, because it meant they didn't need to. They were waiting, watching. Marcus pulled Denise deeper into the passage until they reached a small open maintenance courtyard between buildings. He finally stopped, breathing hard, trying to think. Denise leaned against a wall, shaking. "Marcus, please tell me what is happening." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out the folded letter. Evelyn's words. Denise stared at it. "What is that?" Marcus opened it again carefully. The rain had already blurred parts of the ink slightly, but the message was still readable. He handed it to her. "Read it." Denise hesitated, then took it. As her eyes moved across the page, her expression slowly changed. Confusion, then shock, then fear. Marcus watched her closely, and when she reached the final line, her hand trembled. "They will tell you I was unstable, but the truth is simple." Her voice broke slightly as she read the rest aloud. "They protected themselves first." Silence followed. Denise looked up at Marcus slowly. "This is real," she whispered. Marcus nodded once. "Yes." Behind them, a faint mechanical sound echoed again. Closer this time. Denise stepped toward him quickly. Marcus, what do we do? Marcus looked down at the folder again, then toward the dark end of the passage. And for the first time, he made a decision that wasn't about escaping. It was about exposing. We stop running, he said quietly. Denise stared at him in disbelief. What? Marcus exhaled slowly. They're not chasing us because we're dangerous, he said. They're chasing us because the truth is a beat. And if we keep running, we never control the outcome. Denise shook her head. That man in uniform said they'll protect us if we give it back. Marcus looked at her directly. And you believe him? Denise didn't answer immediately. That hesitation again. Marcus stepped closer. Mom, he said gently, Evelyn spent years without anyone protecting her. Silence. Then he continued. And the only time they started caring was when she had something they couldn't erase. Denise looked down at the letter again. Then back at Marcus. Her voice was barely a whisper. So what are you saying? Marcus tightened his grip on the folder. I'm saying she didn't give this to me to hide it. A pause. She gave it to me to finish it. At that exact moment, a flashlight beam cut through the passage entrance. Both of them froze instantly. A voice echoed from the darkness. Marcus Reed. Calm. Controlled. Close. Step out with the folder. Denise grabbed Marcus's arm tightly again. Panic rising. But Marcus didn't move. Because for the first time since this began, he wasn't reacting. He was choosing. Marcus didn't step forward. He stayed exactly where he was, half shielded by the shadow of the maintenance passage, the folder pressed tightly against his chest like it had suddenly become part of him. Denise's grip on his arm tightened painfully. Marcus, don't, she whispered. But Marcus wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the voice. Because now that he had stopped running, something changed in the way he heard it. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't chaotic. It was controlled, which meant whoever was speaking didn't believe they were in danger. They believed they were in control. Marcus Reed, the voice repeated, closer this time. We don't want this to escalate further. Footsteps followed, measured, slow, not rushing. That detail mattered more than anything else. Marcus slowly shifted his stance. Stay behind me, he whispered to Denise. She shook her head immediately. No, I'm not leaving you. Mom, Marcus said more firmly now, without raising his voice, stay behind me. Something in his tone made her stop arguing. Not obedience, understanding. The flashlight beam moved across the passage walls, cutting through rain mist like a searchlight. Then a figure stepped into view. Not the officer from earlier. Not the tactical man. This one wore civilian clothing, dark coat, no visible insignia, but his posture gave him away immediately. Military trained, confident in a way that didn't need validation. He stopped a few meters away. Close enough to see them clearly. Far enough to give the illusion of safety. Marcus, the man said calmly, I'm here to resolve this without further disruption. Marcus didn't respond. He simply held the folder tighter. The man noticed. Of course he did. Everything about him suggested he noticed everything. You've been placed in a situation you don't fully understand, the man continued. That is not your fault. Marcus let out a quiet, humorless breath. That's what everyone keeps saying, he replied. A faint pause. Then Marcus added, right before they try to take something from me. The man's expression didn't change. But something in his eyes did. A subtle recalculation. Denise stepped slightly closer to Marcus, voice trembling. Who are you? She asked. The man turned his attention to her briefly. My concern is your safety, he said. Marcus immediately shook his head. No, he said sharply. Your concern is the folder. Silence. The rain filled it. For a brief moment, the man said nothing. Then he nodded slightly. Then let's be direct, he said. Yes, the folder is the issue. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. At least he was honest now. The man continued. What Evelyn Cross took was never meant to be outside secured channels. What you're holding contains material that, if exposed publicly, will destabilize more than you can imagine. Marcus stepped forward slightly. Then why not tell the truth? The man didn't answer immediately. That hesitation again. Marcus noticed it every time now. Then the man said something different. Because truth without control becomes damage. Marcus frowned. That doesn't sound like truth, he said. It is reality, the man replied calmly. Denise spoke again, voice shaking but stronger now. You keep talking like people don't matter, she said. Like consequences are just numbers. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then replied softly, consequences are not emotional. They are structural. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Structural. That was how they justified everything. He glanced down at the folder again. Then back at the man. What did she find? Marcus asked. For the first time, the man hesitated longer than before. A fraction of discomfort. Then, unauthorized actions taken during an operation that was already classified at the highest level. Marcus narrowed his eyes. That's not an answer. The man exhaled slowly. It's an explanation you are not equipped to handle responsibly. Marcus almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. So your solution is to erase it again. The man's tone hardened slightly. Our solution is containment. Marcus stepped forward another half step. And if I refuse? The man studied him carefully now. Longer than before, as if Marcus had become a variable that wasn't fitting the expected outcome. Then he said, then you force outcomes that will not favor your survival. Denise gasped softly. Marcus felt her fear beside him again. But something inside Marcus didn't break. It sharpened, because now the pattern was undeniable. Every time they spoke about Evelyn, about truth, about the folder, it always ended in control. Never accountability. Marcus slowly raised the folder slightly. This is what you're afraid of, he said quietly. The man didn't deny it. Marcus nodded once. Then he said something unexpected. Good. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. Marcus turned his head slightly toward Denise. Mom, he said gently, go back inside the passage. Denise shook her head immediately. No. Marcus looked at her fully now. And this time his voice wasn't soft. It was certain. Please. Something in that word made her pause. Not fear. Trust. Slowly, reluctantly, Denise stepped back into the shadows behind him. The man observed this carefully. Then looked back at Marcus. You are making a mistake. Marcus nodded slightly. Maybe. A beat. But it's mine to make. The man's expression changed subtly. This is your final opportunity. Marcus looked at the folder again. Then at the man. And finally, quietly, she didn't survive everything she went through just so I could hand this back. The man's posture shifted instantly. A signal. Subtle. But Marcus caught it. Behind him, faint movement echoed again. More people arriving. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then he did something none of them expected. He opened the folder. The man's voice snapped instantly. Stop. But Marcus had already pulled out the first page. Rain hit the paper immediately, but the ink held. Marcus read one line, then another. And his expression changed. Not fear. Not confusion. Clarity. Because the truth wasn't abstract anymore. It was documented, signed, recorded, approved. Marcus looked up slowly. And for the first time, he wasn't the one being pressured. He was the one holding proof. You're not protecting systems, Marcus said quietly. The man's eyes locked onto him. Marcus continued. You're protecting people who built them wrong. Silence. A heavy one. Then Marcus added softly. And she finally proved it. The man's face tightened. And in that moment, Marcus realized something critical. This was no longer about retrieving evidence. It was about preventing consequences. And Marcus was no longer just a witness. He was the point where consequences began. For a brief moment after Marcus spoke, everything went still. Even the rain seemed to soften, like the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The man in the dark coat didn't move immediately. He just stared at Marcus, studying him, not like a threat anymore, like a problem that had just become more complicated than expected. "You're not understanding the scale of this," the man said finally. Marcus tightened his grip on the folder. "I think I understand it more than you want me to," he replied. Behind him, Denise stayed in the shadows of the passage, silent but visibly shaken. Marcus could feel her presence without turning around. He didn't need to see her face to know what she was feeling. Fear, confusion, and something deeper now, realization. The man exhaled slowly. "This is the part where people like you think they're heroes," he said calmly. Marcus shook his head slightly. "I'm not trying to be a hero." A pause. "I'm just not handing this back." That answer shifted the atmosphere again. The man's posture changed subtly. Less patience now, more finality. "You've been given multiple chances," he said. Marcus nodded. "And I've heard the same explanation every time," he replied. "Containment, stability, protection." He stepped forward slightly. "But nobody ever says protection for who?" Silence. That question landed differently. Because it didn't accuse. It exposed. The man didn't answer right away. And Marcus noticed something important again. Hesitation wasn't random. It was structural. Every time truth got too close, their responses slowed. Filtered. Calculated. Marcus glanced down at the folder again. Then made a decision. He slowly pulled out another page. Denise moved slightly behind him. "Marcus, what are you doing?" she whispered. But Marcus didn't answer her yet. His eyes scanned the document. And as he read, something inside him hardened. Not anger exactly. Understanding. Names. Operations. Dates. Approvals. And at the bottom, signatures. Official. Verified. The kind of signatures that didn't belong to field agents. They belonged to decision makers. Marcus exhaled slowly, then spoke. "This isn't about Evelyn," he said quietly. The man's eyes narrowed. Marcus looked up. "This is about what she exposed. A beat. And what she proved you did." The man's expression changed slightly. For the first time, something like caution entered his voice. "You don't understand context." Marcus nodded. "I understand enough context to know why she stopped trusting you." Silence again. The rain seemed louder now. Marcus continued, voice steady. "You erased her because she stopped agreeing." The man's jaw tightened. "Careful," he said. Marcus didn't flinch. "That's not a threat," he replied. "That's history." A long pause followed. Then the man finally said something different. "Do you know what happens when classified structures collapse publicly?" Marcus looked at him directly. "People are held accountable." The man gave a short, almost humorless breath. "No," he said. "Systems adapt. They rebuild. But the people caught in between don't survive the transition." Denise stepped forward slightly behind Marcus. Her voice was shaking again. "So you're saying the truth would hurt people?" The man turned slightly toward her. "I'm saying the truth would create instability you cannot control." Marcus shook his head slowly. "There it is again." The man frowned slightly. "Excuse me." Marcus raised the folder a little. "Control," he said. "That's always the word. A beat. Not justice. Not accountability. Control." The man didn't respond. Marcus stepped forward another step. "And that's why Evelyn stopped listening to you." The man's expression tightened. "She became unpredictable." Marcus nodded. "No," he said firmly. "She became honest." Silence followed. Then something shifted in the distance. A sound. Multiple engines. Not close yet, but approaching. The man heard it too. His gaze flicked briefly toward the direction of the alley entrance. Then back to Marcus. "You're out of time," he said quietly. Marcus looked at him. "And so are you," Marcus replied. That caught him off guard. A fraction of reaction. Marcus noticed it immediately. Then Marcus did something unexpected again. He raised his voice slightly. "Everyone standing here," he said, "is pretending this is about one folder." A pause. "But it's not." He looked directly at the man. It's about what happens when people stop believing you can define truth alone. The man stared at him. Rain dripped from his coat collar. For a moment, he looked less like authority, and more like someone realizing a situation had escaped its intended boundaries. Denise stepped closer to Marcus again, fear still present but now mixed with something else. "Marcus, what are you going to do?" she whispered. Marcus didn't look away from the man. And when he spoke, his voice was calm. "I'm not running anymore." A long silence followed. Then the man slowly nodded once. Not approval, acknowledgement. And then he said something that changed the direction of everything again. "Then you've forced the final protocol." Marcus frowned slightly. "What protocol?" The man looked at him directly and answered simply, "Containment escalation." Marcus didn't move at first. The words, containment escalation, didn't sound like a warning anymore. They sounded like a switch being flipped. Around them, the world seemed to react before anything else did. Distant engines growing louder, multiple directions at once, cutting through the rain like something tightening its grip around the alley. Denise stepped closer instinctively. "Marcus," she whispered, panic rising again. "What does that mean?" Marcus didn't answer right away, because he was watching the man in the coat now. And what he saw was not hesitation. It was confirmation, like something had just transitioned from negotiation to procedure. The man slowly stepped back half a pace. Not retreating, positioning. And that's when Marcus understood something important. This was no longer a conversation. It was classification being enforced in real time. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said quietly. The man's expression didn't change. "Your perception of this situation is incomplete," he replied. Marcus tightened his grip on the folder. "Then complete it," he said. A pause. Rain drummed harder across the pavement. Then the man spoke again. "Containment escalation means removal of variables that threaten operational security." Denise's face went pale instantly. "Removal," she repeated softly. Marcus felt his stomach drop slightly. But he kept his voice steady. "You mean, me?" The man didn't confirm it directly. He didn't need to. Instead, he said something colder. "It was never supposed to involve you personally." That sentence landed heavier than anything before it, because it confirmed Marcus's worst realization. He wasn't a witness to this system. He was inside it now, whether he agreed or not. Behind them, engines slowed to a stop. More doors opening, more footsteps, closing distance. Marcus looked briefly toward the alley entrance, then back at the man. "You brought them here," Marcus said. The man shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. "You did." Marcus frowned. "That doesn't make sense." The man's voice stayed calm. "It does if you understand what you're holding." Denise stepped forward slightly, voice trembling. "Stop talking in circles," she said. "Just tell us what you want." For the first time, the man looked directly at her fully. And his answer was simple. "We want containment restored." Marcus let out a short breath. "There it is again," he muttered. The man ignored that. "Return the folder. Step away. This ends without further consequence." Marcus looked down at it again, then slowly shook his head. "No," he said. The man's expression tightened slightly. "This is not a negotiation anymore." Marcus nodded. "I know." Silence. Heavy. Dense. Then Marcus looked up and said something unexpected. "Do you know what she told me the first night I met her?" The man didn't respond. Marcus continued anyway. "She said most people only see what they're afraid of." A pause. "Very few still see people." Denise listened silently behind him. Marcus tightened his grip on the folder again. "And you proved her right." The man's jaw tightened slightly. "Enough," he said. But Marcus didn't stop. "Because you didn't see her," he continued. "You saw a problem." He stepped forward slightly. "And now you see me the same way." The man finally responded. "That is not accurate." Marcus nodded. "It is." Another pause. Then Marcus asked the question that shifted everything again. "If I give you this folder, what happens to her truth?" The man hesitated. Just slightly. But enough. Marcus saw it. Denise saw it too. And that hesitation told them more than any answer would have. Finally, the man said, "It remains classified." Marcus nodded slowly. "So it disappears." The man didn't deny it. That silence stretched again. Then Marcus did something no one expected. He opened the folder again. Denise gasped softly behind him. The man stepped forward immediately. "Stop." But Marcus wasn't looking at him anymore. He was scanning the pages. Fast, focused, searching, until he found what he was looking for. A document marked with heavy red classification stamps. He stared at it for a long moment. Then said quietly, "This isn't just about covering mistakes." The man's expression tightened. Marcus looked up slowly. "This is about protecting the people who made them." A long silence followed. The rain felt louder again. The man finally spoke. "You are misinterpreting classified structure." Marcus shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm reading it." Then he did something even more dangerous. He stepped backward, closer to Denise, closer to the deeper shadows of the alley. The man noticed immediately. So did the movement behind him. More footsteps arriving, more containment units taking position. Marcus felt it now, the full net closing, and still, he didn't run. Instead, he looked at Denise. And for the first time, his voice softened. "Mom," he said, "whatever happens next, don't let them separate us." Denise's eyes filled instantly. "Marcus," but he cut her off gently. "I mean it." Then he looked back at the man, and said something that shifted the entire confrontation into its final phase. "If you want this folder, you're going to have to explain it in front of everyone." The man's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Marcus nodded. "To civilians." A pause. "To people who don't speak in containment protocols." The man stared at him. For the first time, uncertainty returned. Because that was not part of control. That was exposure. Behind him, one of the incoming teams spoke into a radio. Marcus caught fragments. Multiple assets converging. Civilian exposure increasing. Request directive confirmation. The system was hesitating now. Marcus realized it, not because he was powerful, but because he had moved the situation outside its designed boundaries. Denise grabbed his arm again, trembling. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Marcus looked at her, and answered honestly, ending the silence. Then he looked at the man one final time, and said quietly, "If Evelyn was dangerous." A pause. "Then maybe the truth is what you're really afraid of." The man didn't answer immediately. For the first time, his silence wasn't strategic. It was strained, like Marcus had pushed the situation into a place where prepared responses no longer worked. Behind him, more vehicles arrived. Doors opening, boots hitting wet pavement, communication radios buzzing in clipped, urgent fragments. The system was fully awake now. Marcus could feel it. Denise stayed close to him, her hand gripping his arm like it was the only stable thing left in the world. But Marcus wasn't shaking anymore. Something had shifted inside him. Not confidence, clarity. The man in the coat finally spoke again, but his tone had changed slightly. Lower, less controlled. "You are escalating a situation you cannot reverse." Marcus nodded slowly. "I already wasn't in control of it," he replied. "You were." A pause. Then Marcus added, "That's the difference." The man's jaw tightened. Behind him, one of the arriving teams stepped closer into view. More tactical positioning, more containment geometry forming around them in real time. Marcus noticed something important now. They weren't rushing him anymore. They were circling him, like they were trying to contain both him and the information at the same time. Denise whispered again, barely audible. "Marcus, there's too many of them." He nodded once. "I know." But he didn't move back. The man took one step forward. "This is your final chance to resolve this peacefully." Marcus looked at him directly. "And peacefully means what?" he asked, handing this over so it disappears again. No answer. That silence was enough. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then he said something that made the air feel heavier. You keep saying containment like it's neutral. A beat. But it's not neutral, is it? The man didn't respond immediately. Marcus continued anyway. It only works one direction. Denise looked at him, confused but listening. Marcus tightened his grip on the folder. Containment doesn't protect truth, he said. It protects whoever decides what truth is allowed to exist. The man's expression shifted slightly. Something like irritation breaking through discipline. You are not trained to interpret this level of structure, he said. Marcus nodded. Neither was she. A pause. That one landed harder. Because Evelyn Cross had been trained. And still, she rejected it. Marcus stepped forward slightly. So what changed her? He asked. Silence. The man didn't answer. Marcus didn't wait for permission anymore. He opened the folder again. This time slower. Deliberate. Denise watched, frozen. The man's voice sharpened immediately. Stop. But Marcus kept going. Inside the folder, he pulled out a photograph. Not random. Not redacted. Clear. Marcus stared at it, and everything inside him shifted again. It showed Evelyn. Not homeless. Not broken. But in uniform. Standing beside classified personnel. But what made Marcus freeze wasn't her presence. It was the background. A sealed facility. And a symbol on the wall behind her. The same symbol he had seen once before. On the necklace. His breath caught. Denise saw his expression immediately. What is it? She whispered. Marcus didn't answer right away. Because now things were connecting too fast. Too clean. Too intentional. He looked up at the man. And for the first time, Marcus's voice changed. Less defiant. More certain. She didn't just discover something, Marcus said quietly. The man didn't respond. Marcus looked down at the photo again. She was inside it. Silence. That silence was different now. Denise stepped closer to Marcus. Inside what? She asked. Marcus slowly turned the photo so she could see it. Her eyes widened immediately. Then Marcus looked back at the man. And said the words that changed everything again. This isn't a cover-up, he said. A pause. It's a system she helped build, before she tried to expose it. The man's expression finally cracked slightly. Not fear. Not anger. Something closer to containment slipping. Marcus saw it. Denise saw it too. Behind them, the footsteps stopped. Even the approaching team seemed to pause for a fraction of a second. Because Marcus had just said something that reframed everything. Evelyn wasn't just a victim of the system. She had been part of it. And that meant everything they were doing now had deeper consequences than anyone was admitting. The man spoke again, quieter this time. You are entering interpretations you cannot verify. Marcus nodded slowly. I don't need interpretation, he said. I have records. He tapped the folder. Then added, and I have your reaction. That line hit differently. Because now Marcus wasn't guessing anymore. He was observing. Denise looked between them, realization dawning slowly. Marcus, she whispered. What does that mean? He didn't take his eyes off the man. It means she wasn't just trying to expose them, he said quietly. A pause. It means she was trying to stop what she helped create before it became permanent. The man finally spoke again, voice low. You do not understand what you are implying. Marcus nodded. I think I do. Another pause. Then Marcus said something that made the entire formation outside shift subtly. And I think that's why you're not arresting me. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Denise felt it too now. The change in pressure. The hesitation in movement. The uncertainty in control. The man stared at Marcus for a long moment. Then finally said, you are no longer a witness. A pause. You are now a variable. Marcus exhaled slowly. And that makes me dangerous to your version of control. No response. Just silence. And in that silence, Marcus realized something final forming around them. This was no longer about Evelyn Cross. It was about what happens when a system loses its ability to define who is allowed to understand it. And for the first time since this began, Marcus wasn't inside their containment anymore. He was standing at its edge. The rain finally started to slow. Not enough to change anything, but enough for Marcus to notice that the world around them hadn't actually been chaotic this whole time. It had been organized, structured, controlled. Even now, surrounded by vehicles, armed personnel, and shifting positions in the dark alley, Marcus could see it clearly. Nothing was random. Everything was a system, responding to a threat. And right now, the threat was him. The man in the coat stepped forward one last time. His voice was quieter now, almost exhausted. "This is where it ends, Marcus." Denise held onto Marcus's arm tighter, her voice breaking. "Please, just give it to them," she whispered. "I don't want to lose you." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, everything else faded, the men, the weapons, the pressure closing in. It was just him and his mother again. Everything he had been trying to protect since the beginning.